Now, before I start, if you love movies or movie soundtracks, check out my online radio show. It'd be so nice of you to do so. Give it a like here at facebook.com/Richard Isles Radio Show, all one word, Richard Isles Radio Show. Link is in the description. Come along, check me out. It'd be wonderful. So, right, let's start. Tales of the undead consuming the blood or flesh of living beings have been found in nearly every culture around the world for many centuries. Today, we know these entities predominantly as vampires, but in ancient times, the term vampire did not exist. Blood drinking and similar activities were attributed to demons or spirits who would eat flesh and drink blood. Even the devil was considered synonymous with the vampire. Despite the occurrence of vampire-like creatures in these ancient civilizations, the folklore for the entity we know today as the vampire originates almost exclusively from the 18th century southeastern Europe, particularly Transylvania, as verbal traditions of many ethnic groups of the region were recorded and published. Now let's talk film. When we're talking movies, we have to talk about The Vampire. The Vampire, 1913, directed by Robert G. Vignola, Italian director known for The Scarlet Letter in 1934, Beauty's Worth in 1922, and Broken Dreams. Now, The Vampire 1913 film is lost as no copy of it's known to exist. Not a good start, to be honest, but it's nice. I like that. I like the idea of a copy being lost. It just adds something to it. Adds like an urban legend, so to speak. So, A Fool There Was, 1915, an American silent film drama. The film was considered controversial for having the intertitles Kiss Me My Fool. People thought it was quite risque. The film popularised the term vamp. Now, vamp, of course, meaning vampire. Now, Les Vampires, The Vampires, 1915, released the same year, is a French silent crime serial film. The main characters are a journalist and his friend who became involved in trying to uncover and stop a bizarre underground Apache gang known as the Vampires. No mythical vamps, I think. It's just the name of the band itself. Pray silence for the next vampire film. We had to wait 7 long years until Nosferatu, 1922, an unlicensed adaptation version of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Well, I love this movie so much. You know, I have a tattoo of Count Orlok on my arm, and it's a silent German expressionist film directed by F.W. Murnau, and the vampire, of course, Count Orlok, played by Max Schreck. Not that Shrek, but Shrek, S-C-H-R-E-C-K. And it's the scariest movie I've ever seen in my whole life. And that's why I have it tattooed on my arm, because I've never experienced terror like it, really. It's the scariest movie I've ever seen, and it will still resonate to me today. And I don't need to say anything over these clips. I don't. I honestly don't. All I just need to do is show these clips, and you'll know how perfect it is and how truly captivating it really is. So do enjoy. Universal released Dracula 1931, starring the legend Bela Lugosi. Universal actually got the rights legally this time, but this is one of the most people think about when they envisage Dracula. The ancient vampire Count Dracula arrives in England and begins to prey upon the virtuous young Mina. Directed by Todd Browning, known for Freaks in 1932. A year later, we had Vampire, spelled V-A-M-P-Y-R, 1932, a surrealist German-French horror film directed by Danish director Carl Theodor Dreyer. It was his first sound film, so quite pivotal in his life. Dracula's Daughter, 1936, released by Universal Studios as a sequel to the 1930 film Dracula. Son of Dracula, 1943, part of the Dracula trilogy. A year later, House of Frankenstein, 1944, monster crossover horror film. The cast includes a mad scientist, played by Karloff, the Wolfman, played by Chaney, Count Dracula, played by John Carradine, a hunchback, played by J. Carroll Nash, and Frankenstein's monster, played by Glenn Strange. What a perfect name, Glenn Strange. Return of the Vampire, the same year. It's in black and white, and describes an Englishwoman's two encounters with a vampire. The first encounter takes place during World War One, and the second during World War Two. And it sounds really, really interesting. I haven't seen this movie, but it sounds really good, so I'm going to give it a watch. Return of the Vampire. Bela Lugosi as the vampire Armand Telsler in that film. House of Dracula, 1945, another monster movie crossover, a direct sequel to House of Frankenstein. The Vampire's Ghosts, 1945. 3 years later, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, 1948, in the many films they had together. The comedy duo meets classic characters from Universal's horror film stable. They encounter Count Dracula, Bela Lugosi, Frankenstein's monster, Glenn Strange, and the Wolfman, Lon Chaney Jr. While subsequent films, the pair meet up with the Mummy, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the Invisible Man. The 50s arrived. 1950s, we kicked off with The White Reindeer in 1952, a Finnish horror drama film. There's a shape-shifting vampiric shenanigans going on here. We had 3 vampire films in 1957. Blood of Dracula, 1957, of course. The Vampires, 1957. And Not of This Earth, 1957. After nuclear war, the people of the planet Davana developed an incurable blood disease. One of its citizens is sent to Earth to examine the blood of the humans for its usefulness in curing Davana's dying race. The intruder, Paul Birch, has adopted the name Mr. Johnson, conspicuous only for his oversensitive ears and his sunglasses, which he wears even in the dark. The sunglasses hide his blank, white-eyed stare, which kills his victims by burning through their eyes and into their brains. Next year, another 4 vamp films in 1958. We had Blood of the Vampire, British horror film. Return of Dracula, exactly what it says on the tin. Castle of the Monsters, a Mexican horror comedy. And Dracula, 1958. The first in the series of Hammer horror films inspired by Dracula. The film stars Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Michael Gough, and Melissa Stribling. In the United States, the film was retitled Horror of Dracula to avoid any confusion. We had Curse of the Undead, 1959, American vampire western film. Uncle Was a Vampire, 1959, an Italian film. Plan 9 from Outer Space, 1959, often dubbed the worst movie ever made. We mentioned this in my Evolution of the Zombie movie video. Edward directs, of course, and aliens resurrect dead humans as zombies and vampires. Hence why it was made. Hence why it was mentioned in the previous zombie movie, Evolution of the Zombie movie. 1960s arrived in the big hippie bus, full of drugs, peace, love, and vampires. Strangely enough, Brides of Dracula, 1960, was a British Hammer Film Productions horror film directed by Terence Fisher. We all should know Terence Fisher. It stars Peter Cushing, the one and only, as Van Helsing, David Peel as Baron Meinster, a disciple of Count Dracula. Blood and Roses, 1960, a French vamp flick. Black Sunday, 1960, also known as The Mask of Satan and Revenge of the Vampire, and it's a 1960 Italian Gothic horror film directed by Mario Bava. The Last Man on Earth, 1964, stars Vincent Price. I'll say that again. Stars Vincent Price, a horror film based on the 1954 Richard Matheson novel I Am Legend. We had Mad Monster Party, 1967, American stop-motion animation musical comedy film. The Fearless Vampire Killers, or Pardon Me, But Your Teeth Are in My Neck, 1967. I'm going to say that again because I love the title. The Fearless Vampire Killers, or Pardon Me, But Your Teeth Are in My Neck, 1967, which is by far the funniest and indeed longest movie title of all time, I think. Another horror comedy film, but this one directed by Roman Polanski, known for Rosemary's Baby and Chinatown in 1974. Vampire Lovers, 1970, British Gothic horror film directed by Roy Ward Baker and starring Peter Cushing. Taste the Blood of Dracula is a British horror film produced by Hammer Film Productions and released in 1970. Daughters of Darkness, 1971, an erotic Belgian vampire film. I know, weird, but you ain't heard the next one yet. Vampiros Lesbos, 1971. Yep, that's all I'll say. Vampiros Lesbos. Now, I don't know if this next one is offensive, rude, or hilarious, but Blackula, 1972, an American blaxploitation horror film produced for American International Pictures blaxploitation films were originally made specifically for an urban black audience. I don't know about your personal opinions, but it doesn't sit right with me. Blood for Dracula in 1974, starring Udo Kier from Ace Ventura. George A. Romero's Martin, 1977. You weren't expecting George A. Romero to pop up in a Vampire Evolution video, but here he is. Young Martin, played by John Amplas, is entirely convinced he's an 84-year-old blood-sucking vampire. Now let's get to what we all should be waiting for. Another hard hitter here with Salem's Lot in 1979, starring David Soul, James Mason, Rob Lowe, Jeffrey Lewis, and it's adapted by a Stephen King book. You know, we have Tobe Hooper directed the TV series turned film. Now, Tobe Hooper was mentioned in our Evolution of the Clown movie with regards to the Poltergeist and the Funhouse. Do check out those videos if you love clowns. Nosferatu the Vampire was released in 1979. It was conceived as a stylistic remake of the 1922 German Dracula adaptation, Nosferatu. And I don't recall another vampire movie until Hunger, 1983, starring David Bowie, as John Blake. Susan Sarandon, of course, is in this. Directed by Tony Scott, brother of Ridley Scott. Tony is the director of Top Gun and was the producer of Man on Fire. Fright Night, 1985. When a teenager learns that his next-door neighbour is a vampire, no one will believe him. Remade in 2011, starring David Tennant and Colin Farrell. The same year Fright Night was released, back in 1985. Also, Life Force was released. A race of space vampires arrive in London and infect the populace. Once Bitten, 1985, with the one and only Jim Carrey. Vamp, 1986. Now we had another hard hitter after this one with the Lost Boys, 1987. Lost Boys! Starring Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, Keith Sutherland, Diane West. One of the best soundtracks in movie history. I can't believe I haven't done a special for him yet, but I shall do. After moving to a new town, two brothers discover that the area is a haven for vampires, directed by Joel Schumacher. Yep, that Joel Schumacher, known for bad Batman movies, but also The Impeccable Phone Booth, 2002, starring Colin Farrell. Monster Squad, 1987. Near Dark, 1987, with Bill Paxton. Near Dark has quite a cult following as well. Next on the scene was The Lair of the White Worm, 1988, British horror film based loosely on the Bram Stoker novel of the same name. Bram Stoker's Dracula, released 1992, just outshone them both. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie, came before the series, and it didn't get as popular as the hit TV show starring Michelle Gellar, directed by Joss Whedon. Buffy is notorious for being Michelle Gellar now. She's kind of overtaken the movie's character.
Vanish at will. The power of his evil desire has no end.
But we really need to talk about Bram Stoker's Dracula. What a performance by Gary Oldman. You know, we have an all-star cast: Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves, Anthony Hopkins. Dracula got a big cast and a big budget, and the film wanted to stay true to the novel as well. I must mention that. But Gary Oldman's Dracula, Count Dracula in this, is just terrifying. We had Kronos in 1993. That sets us up neatly for Interview with a Vampire, 1994. You know, Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Kirsten Dunst, Antonio Banderas, Christine Slater. It was critically revered as well, Interview with a Vampire, and a lot of my friends loved the film completely. Nadja, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Nadja, 1994, and The Addiction, 1995. We had A Vampire in Brooklyn, 1995, a comedy movie starring Eddie Murphy. One of my personal favourites came up next, From Dusk Till Dawn. Everyone be cool, you be cool.
Be cool.
You have so many fantastic scenes in this movie. An ordinary crime thriller until vampires appear, which always shocked me when I first watched the movie. You're just not expecting it. And I love watching the film with friends who have never watched the film before, because they're watching this crime thriller and then bam, vampires appear. It's an all-star cast. We have Quentin Tarantino, Danny Trejo, George Clooney as Seth Gecko, Salma Hayek plays the vampire in the bikini, of course, as well. Juliette Lewis, and the legend Harvey Keitel. I do love Harvey Keitel. Another great vamp film with a wonderful soundtrack. Not directed by Quentin Tarantino, which people always forget. The 90s did take a turn with the vampire movies, having a budget and an all-star cast, which is unseen, really. It's crazy, considering if you look back a bit and realise that it didn't start that way. And if you haven't, you need to watch From Dusk Till Dawn. I urge you to watch it. They've recently made a TV series revolving around the film, of course. It just got even bigger. Then, the Blade franchise, 1998 to 2004, but it kicked off here. One of the best comic movies of all time. Wesley Snipes is the man. You know, you will never forget the rave scene with all the blood. And the song Base to the Place London by Public Domain. It's an incredible movie. If I was ever an owner of a nightclub, I'd have to make blood fall all over people. I'd have to. That's what you got to do, really. And Blade owned 1998. You know, the Blade really did own 1998. It overshadowed Vampire's Kiss and the TV movie Modern Vampires, 1998. Blade even owned John Carpenter's Vampires, which is just unheard of to some extent. A vengeful vampire slayer must retrieve an ancient Catholic relic that, should it be acquired by vampires, will allow them to endure sunlight. John Carpenter, come on, John Carpenter. Come millennia, we had Shadow of a Vampire in 2000, metafiction comedy horror film written by Stephen Katz and starring John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe. The film is a fictionalised account of the making of the classic vampire film Nosferatu. In the same year, Dracula 2000, the film stars Gerard Butler, Christopher Plummer, Johnny Lee Miller. Queen of the Damned in 2002, another hard hitter with the terms of soundtrack. You know, we have Disturbed, Korn, Deftones, Papa Roach, Marilyn Manson, and Static X, all on the soundtrack. Queen of the Damned is a loose adaptation of the third novel of Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles series. Underworld 2003, a beautiful warrior is entranced in a war between the vampire and werewolf races. Starring Kate Beckinsale as Selene, Michael Sheen, we have Bill Nye. A year after that, we had Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman. Night Watch, a Russian film in 2004. Ultraviolet, 30 Days of Night, another vamp movie based on a comic book. The film is directed by David Slade. The story focuses on an Alaskan town beset by vampires as it enters into a 3-day-long polar night. Now, something happened. Something very strange happened after that film. Yeah. The Twilight franchise started in 2008, which had wonderful stylistic visuals, you know, had a mass following. It just kind of wasn't a vampire movie. It didn't have any of the traits we normally saw in a vampire movie. And it was nowhere near, I'm going to say that again, nowhere near as good as Let the Right One In 2008. Let the Right One In, come on, 2008. One of the best vampire movies of all time. Don't watch the 2010 remake, watch the 2008 Swedish romantic horror film directed by Thomas Alfredson, set in the 80s. It's a phenomenal film. Check out the stick scene where he smacks the bully in the face with a stick. Honestly, it has you captivated from start to finish. Let the Right One In. Cirque du Freak, The Vampire's Assistant, 2009. Thirst and Daybreakers, you know, all released in 2009. Vampires Suck, 2010. A scary movie type of movie, bashed by the critics. When will people learn? Vampires Suck, date movie, and these other types of movies like that don't really work anymore. Stakeland, the same year. American vampire horror film and the zombie apocalypse. Kiss of the Damned, Bicentennium, and Abraham Lincoln Vampire Killer in 2012, along with Dark Shadows starring Johnny Depp, directed of course Tim Burton. And Dark Shadows actually received 3 out of 5 stars on IMDb. It got a Metascore of 55, 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. But some people really like that sort of stuff, you know, all the facts and figures, but others don't really care. You can tell them some people that of the worst movie ever made, and they'll still enjoy it. Recently, we've had Only Lovers Left Alive, 2013, Dracula Untold, 2014, and Vampire Academy, none of which I've seen. I'm going to be honest with you, none of which I've seen. Now, future vampire flicks, what's in store for the future? Now, we've stemmed all the way back from 1920s, well, even further back than that. But now we're talking about 2017, and we're expected to have Underworld Blood Wars in January 2017. Corbin Nash, starring Corey Feldman, who plays a cross-dressing vampire named Queenie. The film's also going to feature Malcolm McDowell, Rutger Hauer, and Bruce Davison. Vampire movies are not dying out. They're still going. They keep it on trend, and they keep getting bigger and bigger and having bigger budgets. When you're talking best vampire movie, you have to talk about Nosferatu. Don't forget to like my Facebook page for movie specials. If you're mad on movies like I am, you can check me out, and I'd love a like from you on Facebook. That'd be wonderful, and you can keep up to date with my radio shows. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching.